Okay, so M. Night Shyamalan's Glass is the closer to the trilogy that we apparently didn't know was a thing until 2016 Split. This brings together both films of Unbreakable, where you have Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson, and Split from 2016, where you had James McAvoy playing Kevin, this character with multiple personalities, 23 personalities, I believe, correctly. If I don't know, I lost count. There are apparently somewhere it's over 20. Apparently, he's got a lot. He's got a lot of people in him. So you have him returning here. You also have Bruce Willis returning as the Overseer, the super strong superhero. And Samuel Jackson as Elijah, or he prefers to be called Mr. Glass because his body's very fragile. If you can push him, you can break some bones, but he's super smart. He's like the evil mastermind. So Shyamalan's film essentially brings all of them together and basically just kind of just brings them together and looks at like, oh, well, what would happen if Glass met someone as sinister as Kevin, or the Beast, or the Horde, however you want to refer to him as. I mean, yeah, Kevin doesn't sound as menacing. So, but that's the whole deal. Is that Glass he's the titular character, so you think he's kind of like a big focus here, and he is. Samuel Jackson kind of dominates this film as kind of like the mastermind who's been secretly planning all this. Much like how like M. Night Shyamalan has said, like, and he said this in like the opening. I don't mean he said this in the opening film. I mean, he said this in like an opening, kind of like, when we go to the press screenings, there's usually like a big like title card or stuff like that. There was like a whole paragraph of text saying this was 19 years in the making, as if he'd been planning this since Unbreakable. Well, apparently Glass has been planning this whole event too, apparently. But much like M. Night Shyamalan, it does seem like kind of a little bit of this is being pulled out of his butt here. So the plot is essentially that they're all thrown together in a correctional facility where there's a psychiatrist, who's played by Sarah Paulson, who thinks that all these guys are faking it. They don't really have superpowers. They've just, it's just been coincidence. She's just trying to explain it away. That comic book superheroes aren't real. They're just fantasy. They're just ridiculous. But at the same time, you have Glass, who's kind of like, he's been like kind of been silent this whole time, but he secretly knows, like, no, comic book superheroes are real, and like he obsesses over comic books so much. Like he has all this like talk of like origin issues and limited editions and the different comic book tropes, and that apparently forms like the basis for this mystery about what Glass has planned exactly. And also kind of a weird subversion of it too. Like Glass like really wants to force this comic book angle of like, he wants like the villains to come out. He wants them all to have the superhero and the supervillain names, and he wants to make sure they all have the proper attire for their big battle. He wants to make sure that that the Horde has his shirt off and is like flipping cars and roaring. That's the Overseer to be in his cloak and cape, and Glass wants to be in this very, very fancy suit as he watches it all. Like, yes, let them fight. And it might have been interesting, except for the fact that my biggest problem with the film is that it talks a lot about comic book culture and then goes like nowhere with it. It keeps throwing out all these like terms about like, how villains are formed, how heroes are formed, different comic book lore, how superheroes, how supervillains work, and then doesn't really say anything. It kind of feels all over the place. I got the feeling that Shyamalan might have some interesting commentary in here with how he draws attention to it, like, because they make it seem like Sarah Paulson, her character kind of like hates comic book culture and she thinks it's despicable, and Glass is all about it, thinks it's such a great thing, but they both seem kind of evil, so you're kind of like shifting between like, okay, is comic book culture a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it corrupt? Is it, is there some bigger mythological element we're missing here? Is it relating better to our times? Is it about, I don't know. It goes all over the place. I'm sure if I give it a closer inspection, I might find something more. But as it stands, it's kind of all over the place. One thing I can say for sure, though, is that, well, for one, it's definitely not Shyamalan's worst film. There's no over-the-top ridiculous twist here, because like I said, with Unbreakable and Split, the big twist at the end was like, you're watching a comic book movie. You thought you were watching a thriller, but nah, you're watching a comic book movie. And here with Glass, it's just, it embraces being a comic book movie. It's there's no extra twist, there's no fooling you into thinking that it's a horror film at the end, or that it's some sci-fi film, or that it's about ghosts, or that it's actually a human drama. But no, it's firmly rooted in a comic book film. But if for being rooted in a comic book film, it seems like it wants to say a lot and then just says nothing about it. It just seems like Shyamalan just kind of like throws in all these elements and say, hey, wouldn't it kind of be weird if comic book characters did this, or if a supervillain was kind of conspiring like this, but then never really bring it together. And then he just kind of relies on weird tropes to bring it all together. Like, I will say this, yes, there is like kind of two twists in this film. One twist, and I'm not going to spoil it here, so don't worry if you're actually going to go to the film. I'm not going to spoil it for you here. But one twist is that, there's another villain involved, and when they reveal this villain, it's kind of like, it seems like kind of like standard dressing where it's not that out of well, it comes out of left field, but at the same time, when the villain comes out, you're kind of like, there's nothing really to this villain. And the other twist is just kind of that it's more akin to like a heist film where they keep revealing like, double cross after twist after trap. And it's just mostly the characters trying to outsmart one another. Thinking like, oh, I had this like, I see what you did there. Here's my trap card. I was prepared for you this whole time. Which would be admirable, but except the fact is that it never quite has like that Shyamalan touch of going over the top with it, which I kind of miss. Like I really did dig Split. I think it's one of Shyamalan's better films, but I think that twist just kind of like pushes it over the top. It's like, okay, it's a hallmark. He's got to have it there. And here those hallmarks are kind of gone, and I think that's mostly because he's trying to make kind of like a closure to this trilogy that he doesn't feel the need to kind of continue it. He kind of leaves it open for a continuance, but I get the feeling he's kind of leaving it open there. The other thing I can say is that the acting is great. I think Bruce Willis doesn't have a lot to do here, but I think he's very subtle enough to like, I think Shyamalan knows how to use him. He knows how to make sure that he's gritty, that that he's actually that he feels more like an action hero than anything. I love the way he uses James McAvoy. McAvoy is still the standout here because he's got all these different personalities, and they're interesting to watch how they kind of like take over different aspects of his life and how they're controlled. He's still a more fascinating character than Jackson or Willis's characters, who really do have to kind of dust off these roles and try to like get back into them. They kind of got to ease into them, while McAvoy just slams into that role just so easily. I mean, it hasn't been that long since Split, so he's deeply ingrained in this character. He knows the ins and outs of this guy like nothing, man. And I gotta admit that Samuel L. Jackson was pretty cool to watch as kind of like this deceiver, this mastermind, this evil villain. Even though a lot of his comic book babble is just it gets a little cringy. I'll say this, it feels like The Big Bang Theory, where it wants to say all this stuff about comic books and never quite say that much. I know I'm keep repeating this, but it really is repeated throughout the film. How much it draws on comic book culture. And I will say this, though. If you're a huge comic book fan, if you go to all the superhero movies, there is one subversion in here that is going to be like one giant middle finger to what is promised towards the climax. There's one thing they keep alluding to towards the climax again and again and again, almost like it's a promise, and then they don't quite deliver it. They kind of deliver it, but they also kind of give like this almost like a literal like big middle finger to the audience. Like, you thought, okay, maybe I take that back about Shyamalan not having a twist here about saying you thought you were watching a comic book movie, but no, you're not gonna quite get the comic book movie you want here. I also found it weird how kind of it's shot too. Like there's some interesting shots. Like there's a few battles between the Overseer and the Horde that are kind of all over the place with shots. Sometimes there's some long shots where you get to see them battling, but a lot of times there's a lot of close-ups and also like POV shots, which come really disorienting at times. Probably one of the weirdest things is that towards like the end of the in like the final like third act battle, there's a lot of POV shots, and I can't help but thinking that this is just Shyamalan trying to like shoot around scenes so that he doesn't have to rely on like too much CGI to make you believe that McAvoy is just kind of like this inhuman creature who can like run on all fours and lift cars and throw stuff at you, and that Bruce Willis can like punch through walls and stuff like that. I think Shyamalan is a little bit creative in this aspect, but I think he relies a little bit too much on certain shots to carry some of the bigger and bolder scenes. And it seems like such a mess at times, more thematically than the way it's assembled. I mean, I like the idea behind it. I still like the characters. They're interesting to watch, interesting to follow. But what the plot ultimately leads them to is just this kind of, I don't know, it gets too cozy with kind of like the superhero genre. I kind of feel like this is Shyamalan doing what he did with, he did a film a little while back, you might remember, called The Visit. I can't help but feel like this is just him like jumping on like the big money making train. Like, with The Visit he did like a found footage horror film, because found footage was everywhere. It's like, oh well, I could get into that. I could make a found footage film. And here I think it's like the same deal. It's like, oh, superhero films break. I could do a superhero. I did one with Unbreakable. People want more superheroes. I can totally do that. And of course, M. Night Shyamalan does appear in the film in a cameo that feels a little bit long for him. It's not as cringeworthy, but it's kind of like, I don't know. I think maybe you should have left like just a few seconds early there, M. Night, just a little bit. I mean, aside from the acting, which, I mean, James McAvoy is great in it. Samuel Jackson is great as always. Willis, I think, is used just the right amount. I love Sarah Paulson's kind of emotional, kind of curious character. I love her character there. Some of the twists aren't like entirely left field, but I don't know, they kind of feel very lukewarm compared to M. Night Shyamalan's other films. So, I mean, if you're expecting like a huge twist, there's nothing quite like that in Glass. Most of it comes, compared to Shyamalan's other films, these twists are kind of expected, and they're kind of believable in the context of like the genre they're going for here. But I can't help but feel like there was something bigger that was being tried, that was trying to be said by Shyamalan in this kind of like closure film that isn't really said and just kind of just fluctuates all over the place. So it's not the worst Shyamalan film, but man, it's a frustrating film because you get the feeling like this could have been a better film. I mean, all the ingredients are here and there's an interesting stuff going on, but by the time we get to the third act, it kind of falls back on just like random like superhero tropes and just Shyamalan doing his usual twisty thing, except not as bombastic as it usually is. And it kind of makes you almost nostalgic for his kind of like over the top twists that he usually does with his films. I was remarking how I saw this film with a friend who I actually brought to the other film, Split. And we were talking like after Split, like did the twist at the end of Split make it better? And I thought, you know what, it made me have more of a genuine reaction, because throughout I was thinking, oh, this is a pretty decent thriller. This is actually pretty good for M. Night. And then we got to that ending, I was just like, oh, fuck you, M. Night. And here I'm just kind of, I don't know, I kind of just feel a little bit depressed that the film isn't quite as great as it could have been. Like, not even from like a bombastic perspective. Like, if you're going into this film expecting that the twists are going to be so terrible and over the top, you're probably not going to get that here. And honestly, you might kind of miss it too. So, I mean, Glass has its moments. Mainly go for the acting. You might enjoy it, but I gotta say, for the themes that it brings up here, it feels like so much missed potential. It's such a confounding and frustrating film. So, for Glass, 2 out of 5 stars.